All right. Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to share our topic today. I saw it on TikTok, making sure your video assets are accessible in different languages. My name is Una Hartzell Baird. My pronouns are she, her. Tiffany Hansen is joining me behind the scenes today to help moderate questions. And you will see that ASL interpreter Marla is here with us as well. So if you would like to make sure that you can see Marla during the entire presentation, please be sure to pin her on your screen. So I have worked in language access for nearly a decade. Over the last 6 years, I have been the director of translation at Luna Language Services. I'm a big fan of pastries, state parks, and farmers markets. So today we're going to walk through subtitling, captioning, voiceover, and video overlay as tools for language access for video audiovisual assets. This is an opportunity to start exploring how these services can leverage a larger impact for your teams, organizations, and clients. And in an age where video is quickly becoming the norm for communication, including TikTok, video assets are really here to stay. So, whether you're doing this work right now or just thinking about it for the future, this is a great place to start. What we're going to be doing today, we're going to begin by looking at the spectrum of accessibility when it comes to audiovisual assets. Then we're going to walk through a few definitions, including some things that folks might not be as familiar with. And then next, we'll talk about the processes that are followed for these projects and close out with a conversation around costs and some tips for how you can increase cost effectiveness and efficiency with these projects. Today, when we talk about accessibility, we typically think about the picture that we see on the left. We've got a brick wall with a sign that says accessible entry and an almost universally recognizable symbol of a person sitting in a wheelchair. So most often when we talk about accessibility, we're talking about physical accessibility. But language access is a huge piece of accessibility as well. And one piece of it that's not as often thought about is illustrated by the picture on the right, which features a young child reading an early reader book. In this instance, one of our family favorites, Hop on Pop by Dr. Seuss. And we don't often consider literacy as an aspect of language access and accessibility. But when we realize that many deaf and hard of hearing people who are native users of ASL learn English as a second language, or the fact that education isn't equally available to all people in all areas, in all walks of life, we realize that removing literacy as a barrier is important when it comes to access of audiovisual content. So specifically, when we are looking at accessibility of a video, a few things that we want to consider when it comes to saying, oh, we need to subtitle or caption this or do both. And in particular, things that won't be served as well by machine or computer generated captions or subtitles. First, they may not be as good at picking up on the fact that there's going to need to be a limit of characters per second displayed. And what that means is that because we can only read so quickly, there has to be a limit on how many characters there are on a screen. So when we do this, oftentimes if a machine is doing captioning or subtitling, it just cuts off. Whereas, as we'll talk about a little bit further on, if a human is doing it, they may actually rewrite some of that content as well. When it comes to the text on screen, whether it's in captions and where those captions are placed compared to where the text is on the screen, like the picture that we have on the slide where you see food on one of the windows, if our caption happened to be in that area, it would be difficult to read. Likewise, localization in videos. And what we mean when we talk about localization is taking the language and cultural aspects and merging them together to have the best possible translation that captures the intent and tone of a message. So in this instance, we wouldn't necessarily need to translate food because it's going to become apparent during the scene exactly where we are and what's going on. But sometimes there is signage, or there's perhaps a letter a character is reading on screen that may need to be translated in the subtitles because it's a critical element to the storytelling. As relevant as the things that are stated or seen on the screen are also some of the unspoken things like ambient sounds. If a glass shatters or a door slams, if these are relevant to the story, they would need to be captured, but a computer generated caption or subtitle wouldn't go that far. So how do we make audiovisual assets more accessible? Let's start by defining some of the terminology. Captions and subtitles in particular often get used interchangeably, much like how interpreting and translation do. But the distinction's important, so let's review what some of these terms mean. When we are talking about captions, in its most simplest form, it's a written transcription of audiovisual content. But to qualify as a caption, it also needs to align to the start, pacing, and ending of speech or sounds presented. It encompasses spoken language and audio, as well as ambient and musical elements. Captions are written in the same language as the audio, and they're designed for deaf and hard of hearing viewers who understand the source language of the audio. Now, remember when we talked about accessibility and the fact that native users of American Sign Language learn English as a second language, and that might not be the most accessible way to communicate for them, that we can see how captions might be a bit problematic. And we'll walk through what some of the better opportunities and options are in a couple of slides. When we're talking about subtitles, they're very similar to captions. It's a written transcription of audiovisual content. It's also aligned to the start and pacing and end of the speech sounds. It's now translated into the target language that's different from the language in the audio. And it is also designed for hearing viewers who don't speak the language featured in the audio. So if a movie or video or clip is subtitled and someone who is deaf or hard of hearing is using those subtitles, they may not get the full scope of the message or the tone or intent if there's ambient sounds that are not also being included, which is typical for subtitles. Now, when we talk about voiceover specifically, this is narration. So in this instance, the image of the speaker is not included. This could also be audio only, like radio spots or public service announcements, and it could accompany visuals. So the example I have here is a training video that Luna has put together. It uses animation along with voiceover. Now, when it comes to audio description, this is an area that we've found a lot of people aren't as aware of. This is where narration is used to narrate the visual content of a video. The image of the speaker is not included, much like other voiceover, but this provides accessibility to people who are blind or have visual impairment. This is one where I feel like it's also best shown rather than described. So we'll watch a brief clip. Bear with me while I change my screen. Here we go.
It's the circle of life. Hundreds of animals gather at the bottom of Pride Rock, a tall, flat ledge that towers over the rest of the savannah. Zazu, a small blue bird with a large beak, flaps to the ledge. He bows to Mufasa, a powerful, dignified lion with a thick red mane. Rafiki, an elderly baboon with white hair, slowly climbs up to the ledge and hugs Mufasa warmly. They walk back to a cave where Mufasa's wife, Sarabi, cuddles a tiny lion cub in her paws. Smiling, Rafiki bends over Simba, the baby lion, and shakes his walking stick, which has 2 melons tied to it. Simba swats his paws at the melons playfully. Rafiki breaks one open. The wise old baboon dips his thumb in its juice and draws a line on Simba's forehead. Then he takes a handful of sand and sprinkles it over him. Simba's parents, Mufasa and Sarabi, smile and lean their heads together.
So that is an example of audio description being used to help with accessibility of an audiovisual asset. Okay. Now, another area that's related to voiceover work is dubbing. Here, we are revoicing the audio in a target language. So the original may be English, but we would like to have a voiceover done in French and dubbed or revoiced for the video. This matches in the tonality, the emotion, and the pacing, and voices are selected to match the character demographics, and it's also synchronized. With video overlay, we're using a sign language interpreter who has been captured in a video and literally overlaying it on top of the original video. This can be done in a couple of different ways, whether as a standalone that can be synchronized or resynchronized with an existing video, or it can also be already added to that video so that it's a single asset. The same principles of dubbing apply here for interpreters providing signed captions. And here you can see, this is the example I'm sharing is a culture series video that Luna has produced where we are using video overlay for an ASL interpreter. We'll explore some best practices and processes next, and I wanted to highlight a couple of the parameters that are specifically related to translations that are being used for subtitling. So as we mentioned before, the text on screen needs to follow certain readability standards. Therefore, we're typically limiting the number of characters that are on the screen, the number of lines that are on the screen, as well as making sure that the duration that the text is on the screen is appropriate. Now, if you have ever had an experience of listening to a movie or video with captions on, you've maybe sometimes seen where the audio doesn't exactly match up with the captions. And most of the time, this is not a mistake. It's a matter of readability. It's been modified in order to be at a comfortable readability level. This also means that for subtitles, there's often more work that needs to go into it rather than just translating the original caption file or the original transcript. But there has to be some editing and some transcreation even done in order to accommodate the fact that most languages expand from English about 20 to 30%. So when I'm talking about transcreation, it means taking kind of a translation to the next level where we are using what we know and understand about the tone and the goal of the message, and we're restructuring what's being said in a way that's going to accommodate that better. Because of the way we have some constraints with subtitling, it's often results in needing to work with highly experienced translators that work in this area, as well as having more time for the project, because this is work that can't be helped by machines quite as easily. So when we are working on best practices of subtitling and captioning, understanding your project and providing guidelines to ensure that the style, the voice, the tone are captured adequately is essential. Some of the best practices for subtitling and captioning include having a 2-line text maximum, 42 characters per line, and an 18 character per second reading speed. You want to have your text show on screen for 1 second minimum and 5-second maximum duration. And it should be synchronized with the start of dialogue. Along with this, we want to avoid covering any on-screen text with captions or subtitles. So this is where oftentimes you'll see captions might start at the bottom or start at the top of a screen and then move as the text on the screen is removed or moves on to a different location. When we're talking about best practices for voiceover and video overlay, whether your project is a public service announcement, doing audio description like that Lion King clip, or ASL video overlay for accessibility, then the best practices, these best practices will ensure that your message is going to carry its intended impact. And here we definitely want to make sure that any translation meets the speaking rate requirements in the target language. We want to make sure that voiceover is lip synced where it's needed and appropriate. The timing of that audio description or video overlay is matching the on-screen action and dialogue. And of course, at any time it's possible, native speakers are used for this work. How it all comes together, whether your project needs subtitles, captions, voiceover, overlay, or all of the above, the place to start is by creating a glossary and a basic style guide to support consistency and accuracy in the files. So things to include in a glossary and a basic style guide would be, for example, acronyms or initialisms that are being used. So an acronym is NASA and an initialism is FBI. And making sure that you define those, particularly because in some instances there might be translations that are already available, but in other instances, we might need to accommodate some description within the translation so that the audience is well versed in the content. Of course, spelling of all proper nouns, whether they're names or locations, is critical to making sure there aren't errors or assumptions being made about how to spell something that might be audio only. Definitions of any key terms that can help the translation team more quickly and accurately translate or transcreate any content that might need to be shortened. And if your audio doesn't have high quality, then any notes on difficult to hear or understand sections is helpful for captioning and subtitling. When we're working with voiceover in particular, directorial notes can be helpful. And for example, you can include things like what kind of tempo the person should have. Is this person happy who's doing the voiceover? Is the person tired, excited, nervous? As much detail as you can provide, particularly if an existing voiceover doesn't already exist in a source language that the voiceover artist can pull from. Much like any document translation, subtitles need to be translated, edited, and proofread by 2 professional human translators. At Luna, this follows our ISO 17100 standard certified process for translations, which meets the requirements for qualifications, experience, and education of translators. Many of our clients come to us with videos that don't have a transcript or captions or anything created yet. And oftentimes, this is the first step to creating the rest of the audiovisual language accessible assets. The final files that we deliver are based on what our clients request and could be a .srt file, which is a very basic time-coded Word file that contains captions or subtitles, but we can take it soup to nuts. So if captions are required to be burned into the video or a video overlay to be applied to a single asset, we can help with every step of the way. Where we talk about voiceover more specifically, we also want to make sure that the voice selection is something that's done prior to the voice work beginning. We want to make sure, again, that those scripts and notes are included, that if there is feedback, that we have that so that we can determine if additional edits need to be made and what can be helped there. We also want to agree on how many editing rounds we want to include in the original quote for the work. Some clients want to provide feedback and have multiple rounds of editing. Others are very simple projects that require no rounds of editing after the initial voiceover is completed. We can deliver in multiple options, for example, MP3 files or .wav files. And if dubbing is being completed, then this would be in an MP4 video format. When we are working on video overlay, again, translation into American Sign Language is happening. So this is accounted for, as well as making sure that any directorial notes are included, just like for voiceover. Editing rounds are considered, and then the delivery options that we've discussed in terms of whether the video will be a standalone or something that is embedded inside the original audiovisual asset. There are different steps, skills, and time requirements for all of these types of projects. So while there are many flavors of software available that help streamline captioning and subtitling and audiovisual engineering of video assets, we also still know that we need qualified professionals each step of the way to make sure that the final product is exactly what our clients need. So when we are looking at captioning costs, what we're assessing are the number of video minutes. So how long will this project be? What is the audio quality? Will it be easy to caption something like a high quality presentation versus maybe a video that's been pulled from the internet or maybe even a home movie? Availability of the reference resources. So if there are references easily available and resources are provided, this takes less time and is less likely to need additional editing after the fact. Likewise, whether the captions needed are closed or open captions, whether the file format requested is something that is simple to do or might take more extensive time. For example, if I provide a .srt file versus burning in those captions. And likewise, the volume of work. At Luna, we provide volume-based discounts for projects. And so anytime that we have the ability to work on a larger scale project, this allows us to provide additional cost discounts. With subtitling costs, we're looking at some of those same factors as captions. And we also are considering the cost of translation, editing, and proofreading, or TEP, in the target language or languages that are selected. We also want to make sure that any transcreation needs are accommodated so that we can stay within those readability parameters. And this can add additional costs as it does take both more time and a higher level of professional translation skill. With voiceover costs, oftentimes the costs may include translation if the voiceover is into a language other than English, the voices selected to perform the work, the number of voices needed, as well as the number of audio minutes that are within the scope of that project. And we also look at how many rounds of editing and revision might be requested. Additionally, if Luna is handling some of that engineering work on the back end, we're looking at time required for audio cleanup and engineering, as well as any dubbing or lip syncing requirements that might need engineering time as well. With video overlay, the costs are determined, again, no surprises here, translation, as well as the number of audio minutes, the number of revisions that might need to be completed, and any video engineering costs that might be part of this as well. Just like we dub and lip sync for voiceover, we want to make sure that anything that is embedded in that video is synchronized and flows smoothly. Some of the ways that we can realize some cost savings include providing those reference materials. And I really cannot emphasize this enough. Having a style guide, even a very basic one, including some of the elements we previously discussed, is so helpful. Providing a glossary so that any translation or transcreation can really be captured adequately so that the tone, the intent, everything that you have worked so hard to put into your audiovisual asset is preserved. Likewise, providing scripts or transcripts already created can both speed up the process and take fewer costs to accomplish for the final project. And those directorial notes about pacing, about the tone that someone should have, even about things like the age of the speaker or the mental state of the speaker as they're talking. When it comes to audiovisual assets, they're an engaging and impactful way to tell stories. The limited English proficient and deaf and hard of hearing communities deserve inclusion in these stories through language access. And inclusion benefits not only the people who can now access this content in those different language communities, but also the businesses and the organizations and service providers where they can more easily access services and build brand loyalty. So I am thrilled and so grateful that you took the time today to share with me and to learn a little bit more about these services and options for accessibility. I would love it if you'd share your experiences with audiovisual assets with me. You can find me on LinkedIn at UNADHB. And you can also reach me via email, una@luna360.com. At this point, we'll be more than happy to take questions, and I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen.
Una, so we did have one question in the chat that I think is really important to address. So Catherine says, when you say we, are you meaning that Luna can actually provide these services for our organization? And then if you want to share the best way for folks to reach out.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's a great question. And thank you for putting that there. We can do all of this work. In fact, we have both internally and for external clients when it comes to that type of accessibility. And I'm going to put a couple of emails into the chat. The first one is our translation email, and it is the general project management email where you can reach me and the rest of my team, whether you have questions about how to do something or have a project that you would like a quote on, we can handle it there. And I will also, again, include my email. And I am adding in Tiffany's email as well. Tiffany and I work very closely to make all your audiovisual dreams come true. Great
so
question.
For those of you who are watching or recording, these emails will be in the description of the YouTube video. Catherine, I'll reach out to you directly and we'll get a conversation started about what your needs are. Other than that, it was a pretty straightforward presentation, so we don't have any other questions. Una, do you want to say anything else to close us out?
Yes, there's one thing that, the way that we came up with the idea of this webinar and talking about language accessibility with audiovisual assets is because of my deep love and possible obsession with TikTok. And this is something that if you haven't experienced TikTok yet, that is one of those things that I held off on for a very long time. But once I got into it, I really got hooked. And one of the things that I noticed on there was the captions that were auto-generated were really terrible and oftentimes weren't as accurate as what you would expect or need for accessibility. But the second thing I noticed is that there are a number of ASL interpreters who are using the duet feature in TikTok to provide ASL accessible language access and accommodation there to a variety of different videos. So even though TikTok did not intend the duet option on their videos to be used in this way, it's an example of how modern technology is helping to create a more accessible environment in many ways. So if you have some time, you want to explore it, if you search for, ASL interpreter on TikTok, you'll be able to find some examples of those duets.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining us, and I will be sending an email out to all of our registered participants with the link to this recording if you'd like to share with any of your colleagues. And Catherine, I'll be reaching out to you directly. And if you all have any other questions, please reach out to Una and I. We'd be more than happy to help.
Absolutely. Have a great day, everyone. Thank you for coming.